I got fired in front of the entire office after securing a $60 million deal. They had no clue I now own their biggest partner. The conference room glass wasn't soundproof, but it might as well have been a fortress wall. Inside, 7 men in tailored suits leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. As I stood before them, the only woman in the room, my navy blazer felt suddenly too warm under the spotlights, but my voice never wavered. Gentlemen, what I'm proposing isn't just a partnership, it's the future of enterprise logistics. I clicked to the next slide, revealing projections that made even the most stoic board member straighten his posture. $60 million over 3 years is aggressive, I know, but the integration of our systems creates efficiencies neither company could achieve alone. Martin Chen, CEO of Apex Solutions, my employer of 5 years, nodded slightly from the corner of the room where he observed. That tiny gesture was his version of enthusiastic approval. In the 11 months I'd spent building this proposal, his approval had become as rare as rainfall in a drought. The client CEO, Richard Harmon of Technova Solutions, removed his glasses. The numbers are compelling, Ms. Sullivan, but we've had 3 firms pitch similar integrations this quarter. I smiled, having anticipated this exact moment. Which is precisely why I've prepared this. I distributed sealed folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find a proprietary algorithm my team developed that reduces cross-platform latency by 3. No other firm can offer this because no other firm has spent the last year building it specifically for your infrastructure. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. 11 months of red-eye flights, missed birthdays, canceled vacations. All for this moment. Behind me, I could feel Martin's eyes burning into my back. A mixture of surprise and something else, something that should have warned me. Richard opened his folder, scanned the contents, and closed it with a decisive snap. I've heard enough. Let's talk terms. 4 hours later, I stood in Richard's corner office, watching the sunset paint Chicago's skyline in hues of amber and gold. We'd moved beyond the boardroom formalities. Our sleeves rolled up as we finalized the last details of what would become a historic partnership. You know, Richard said, refilling my glass with sparkling water, when Martin first recommended you as the lead on this project, I was hesitant. Not because you're a woman, he added quickly, misreading my expression, but because your background was in software, not logistics. I nearly dropped my glass. Martin recommended me? Richard nodded, almost insisted. Actually, said you were the only one who could make this work. The revelation struck me as odd. Martin had fought against my involvement initially, claiming someone with more seniority should handle the company's most important prospect in years. I'd had to gather allies on the executive team just to stay on the project. Well, I said, recovering quickly, I'm grateful for his confidence. We shook hands as the city lights began to sparkle below. The contract would need final legal review, but the deal was essentially done. $60 million that would single-handedly save Apex's declining quarter and cement my position in the company. Olivia, Richard said as his assistant came to escort me out, people like you don't come along often in business. Remember that. I nodded, not yet understanding the weight his words would soon carry. The celebration at Apex headquarters the next morning was understated but unmistakable. Colleagues I barely spoke to by my desk with coffee and congratulations. The quarterly projections on the digital board in the main hall had already been updated to reflect the impact of the Technova deal. For the first time in 18 months, the line pointed upward. But something felt off. Katie, my most talented direct report, had been reassigned that morning without explanation. 2 others had received transfer notices to departments that had nothing to do with their expertise. And Martin, who should have been ecstatic, had only sent a 2-word email. Well done. When Diane from HR stopped by with forms for the performance bonuses typically awarded after major deals, she seemed uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. Is everything okay? I asked, signing the paperwork. Of course, she said too quickly. Just busy with some restructuring plans. Restructuring? I echoed. Nothing for you to worry about. The deal is fantastic news. Truly. As she hurried away, I noticed Martin in his glass-walled office, watching our interaction with unusual intensity. When our eyes met, he didn't look away or acknowledge me. He simply continued staring until I broke the contact. That night, I called my mentor, a former Apex executive who'd left to start her own consultancy. Something feels wrong, I explained after detailing the day's events. The biggest deal in company history, and everyone's acting like there's a funeral scheduled. The silence that followed lasted too long. "Sarah, are you there?" "I'm here," she said finally. "Listen carefully. Check your employment contract, specifically the clauses about commission structures and intellectual property. And maybe call that lawyer friend of yours, the one who helped with your investment fund." "My investment fund? What does that have to do with anything?" "Probably nothing," she said. "But in this business, it pays to be prepared for anything." I stayed up until 3 a.m. reviewing documents, making calls, sending encrypted emails. By dawn, my suspicions had crystallized into something darker, more defined. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture I'd been too busy to see. Martin hadn't recommended me for this project because he believed in me. He'd done it because he needed someone to deliver the impossible and then to disappear. The morning of the all-hands meeting arrived with an unnervingly cheerful company-wide email from Martin. "Exciting announcements ahead," the subject line declared, as if we were about to receive holiday bonuses instead of whatever was actually coming. I'd barely slept, the conversation with my mentor echoing in my head like a warning bell. My phone buzzed with a text from Katie. "What's going on? Finance team's been locked in the conference room since 7 a.m. I texted back, "No idea. See you at the meeting." That was a lie. I had some idea, enough to have spent the night securing digital copies of every document, email, and contract I'd worked on. Enough to have called my lawyer at midnight, who had confirmed my suspicions about the clause in my employment contract. Enough to have set up an emergency meeting with my investment partners for that afternoon. The central atrium of Apex headquarters could hold all 300 employees when necessary. Today, it was standing room only. Excited murmurs filled the space as I slipped in through the side entrance, positioning myself near an exit, not out of fear but strategy. Martin stood on the small stage looking immaculate as always, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his custom suit spotless. Beside him stood 3 board members I recognized and a woman I didn't. Slim, severe, with the kind of calculated blandness that screamed external legal counsel. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," Martin began, his voice carrying that practiced warmth he reserved for public appearances. "As you know, Apex has secured the largest contract in our company's history, a $60 million partnership with Technova Solutions." Applause erupted. Several people turned to look at me, smiling and nodding in acknowledgement. I kept my face neutral. This landmark achievement represents everything Apex stands for: innovation, persistence, and strategic thinking, Martin continued. "It also marks a turning point for our organization, a chance to realign our priorities and strengthen our core values." The room quieted as people sensed the shift in his tone. "With great success comes great responsibility to our shareholders and to the future of this company. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions that serve the greater good." He paused, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. "In that spirit, today we're announcing an internal restructuring, effective immediately." My heart didn't race, my palms didn't sweat. Instead, a strange calm settled over me as I watched the theater play out exactly as I'd predicted. "Olivia Sullivan has been a valued member of our team, contributing significantly to the Technova deal," Martin said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "However, as we enter this new phase, leadership has determined that her role no longer aligns with our vision for the department." The silence in the room was absolute. 300 people holding their breath at once. "Olivia will be leaving Apex, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My direct reports looked stricken. Even the executives flanking Martin seemed uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact with the audience. "We thank her for her contributions and wish her the best in her future endeavors," Martin finished, his voice flat and final. I felt everyone's eyes on me, waiting for the tears, the protest, the scene that would give them some to discuss over lunch. Instead, I smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to unnerve Martin more than any outburst could have. Diane from HR materialized at my side, termination letter in hand. "If you'll come with me to collect your things," she whispered urgently. "Of course," I replied, my voice carrying in the silent room. I wouldn't want to delay the celebration. Someone in the back coughed uncomfortably. Martin had already turned to the next agenda item, announcing promotions designed to distract from what had just occurred. A desperate attempt to reframe my dismissal as a positive organizational change. In my office, Diane watched nervously as I packed my personal items into a cardboard box. Family photos, a degree from MIT, the plant my team had given me last Christmas. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "The deal was brilliant. Everyone says so." I placed the termination letter on top of my belongings. "No severance," I noted, keeping my voice light. "Interesting choice." She flushed. "It wasn't my decision. Legal said something about the terms of your employment contract regarding intellectual property rights." "Did they?" I raised an eyebrow. "And did legal happen to review the final language of the Teknova contract before it was signed?" I wouldn't know about that." Of course she wouldn't. Because if legal had actually performed their due diligence, today might have gone very differently. Security escorted me to the lobby, past wide-eyed colleagues and whispered conversations. At the revolving door, I turned back to survey the building that had been my professional home for 5 years. The security guard, who had played on the company's softball team I'd coached, looked miserable. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he said, genuine regret in his voice. "This isn't right." I handed him my badge. "Don't worry, Jake. Sometimes the most interesting journeys start with an unexpected push." Outside, the spring air felt electric against my skin. My phone was already buzzing with messages from shocked colleagues and LinkedIn notifications from recruiters who'd somehow already heard the news. I ignored them all, opening only the calendar notification reminding me of my 2 p.m. meeting. The car I'd called pulled up to the curb. "Where to?" the driver asked. I gave him an address in the financial district, then settled back, watching Apex headquarters recede in the rear mirror. They thought they'd cut me loose. They had no idea they'd just set me free. The law offices of Brunswick and Hargrove occupied the 32nd floor of a sleek downtown tower, with views that made even the most jaded business executives pause in appreciation. The conference room where I sat had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, though today I hardly noticed the vista. "They're already using your deal in their press releases," said Michael Brunswick, sliding a tablet across the polished table. The Apex website featured an animated banner announcing the historic Teknova partnership, complete with stock photos of handshakes and upward trending graphs. My name was conspicuously absent. "Predictable," I said, handing the tablet to Eliza Chen, my other guest. "What's the market's reaction?" "Their stock jumped 8% this morning," Eliza replied, adjusting her glasses. "Investors are impressed." Eliza wasn't just my former college roommate. She was also my partner in Horizon Capital, the angel investment fund we'd established 3 years ago with our third partner, Terrence Williams. Officially, I'd been a silent investor while working at Apex, allowed by my contract as long as there was no conflict of interest. Until 6 months ago, there hadn't. Michael cleared his throat. "Let's review the situation. Apex terminated your employment, without severance, claiming you violated intellectual property clauses in your contract. Meanwhile, they're profiting from the $60 million deal you orchestrated with Teknova, which is actually GlobalLogix's newest acquisition," Eliza added, a slight smile playing at her lips. And there it was, the detail Martin and the Apex board had completely missed. Teknova wasn't just any tech firm. It was a recently acquired division of GlobalLogix, an international logistics giant, a company that Horizon Capital had invested in heavily during their last funding round. "How much of GlobalLogix do we own now?" I asked, though I knew the answer. 8%, said Eliza. "Enough for a board seat, which Terrence has occupied for the past 4 months." The timing hadn't been accidental. When I'd first spotted the patterns at Apex, the way top performers were mysteriously let go after major achievements, how Martin claimed credit for others' innovations, the suspicious clauses buried in employment contracts, I'd started plotting my exit strategy. The Teknova opportunity had simply accelerated my timeline. Michael slid a document across the table. "This is what they don't know about the contract you negotiated." He pointed to section 14.3, highlighted in yellow. "The name on this contract isn't actually Teknova Solutions. It's GL Novatech, a subsidiary wholly owned GlobalLogix," I finished, "with Horizon Capital as a significant shareholder. And you, Michael continued, listed as a principal consultant on all North American integrations. I hadn't hidden this fact. Legally, I couldn't. The information was there in the contract, buried in the subsidiary section that most executives skimmed over, assuming their legal team would flag any issues. But Apex's legal team had been so excited about the dollar figure that they'd rushed through due diligence, missing the connection entirely. So what happens now? Eliza asked, though the gleam in her eye suggested she already knew. I leaned back in my chair. Now we wait. 3 things will happen. Apex will realize they can't deliver on the technical specifications without me. Martin will try to renegotiate terms, and GlobalLogix will insist on meeting with whoever's handling the implementation. And that's when they'll discover you're on the other side of the table, Michael said, nodding appreciatively. Elegant. Not revenge, I clarified. Strategic repositioning. After the meeting, Eliza and I walked along the river, the spring sun warm against our faces. For the first time in months, I felt light, unburdened by the posturing that had consumed my days at Apex. You know they'll try to sue you when they figure it out, Eliza said. Claim conflict of interest or breach of contract. They can try, I replied. But the investment in GlobalLogix happened before Technova was acquired, before the deal was even on the table. And I disclosed all my outside business activities, as required. Michael has the documentation. We stopped at a cafe, ordering lattes we carried to a table overlooking the water. The city moved around us, everyone rushing somewhere important, just as I had been a day ago. What tipped you off? Eliza asked. About Apex. I mean, you could have stayed, taken the credit for the deal, moved up. I stirred my coffee slowly. Remember Vanessa Torres? She landed the Midwest healthcare contract last year, twice the projected revenue. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Then there was Jason Kim, who developed the AI component that became Apex's flagship product. He was reorganized right after the launch. And you saw the pattern. I saw that Martin builds his empire on other people's talents, then discards them when they shine too brightly. I knew my turn was coming. I just needed to be prepared when it did. My phone buzzed with a notification. An email from Richard Harmon at Technova. Unusual developments here. Can we meet tomorrow? I showed Eliza the message. It's starting already. Sooner than we expected, she nodded. Good. On the walk back to my apartment, I passed a newsstand with business magazines prominently featuring tech CEOs, confident men in expensive suits, celebrated for their visionary leadership. How many of their successes, I wondered, were built on the silent contributions of people like me? That evening, I received 5 LinkedIn messages from Apex employees, including Katie, all expressing outrage at my termination. 2 mentioned that the implementation team was already struggling with the Technova integration specs. 1 included a screenshot of a tense email exchange between Martin and the development director. I responded to each message with the same careful wording, "Thank you for your support. Career paths take unexpected turns, but I've landed on my feet. I'll be announcing my next venture soon." What I didn't say, I'd never left the game. I just changed my position on the board. As I prepared for bed, my phone rang. Terrence, the 3rd partner in our investment fund, and now a GlobalLogix board member. "It's official," he said, without preamble. "They've scheduled a comprehensive review of the Apex contract for next Tuesday. The GlobalLogix CEO wants to ensure all technical specifications are achievable given the recent changes at Apex." "And you've been asked to attend?" I guess. Along with the Director of Strategic Partnerships for North America. His voice carried a smile. "Your official appointment letter arrives tomorrow, by the way. Congratulations." I ended the call and walked to my window, looking out at the city skyline. Among those 1,000 twinkling lights was the Apex building, where Martin was probably working late, convinced he'd masterfully eliminated a threat while retaining the prize. He had no idea what was coming. The GlobalLogix headquarters towered over the financial district, 60 floors of architectural brilliance that made Apex's offices look like a starter home beside a mansion. I stepped out of my town car, straightening my new charcoal suit, selected specifically to communicate quiet authority rather than desperation to impress. 3 weeks had passed since my public dismissal. 3 weeks of careful preparation, strategic meetings, and the occasional sleepless night. Today would determine whether it had all been worth it. Director Sullivan, The security guard nodded respectfully as I crossed the marble lobby. That title still felt new on my shoulders. Director of Strategic Partnerships for North America, a position GlobalLogix had created specifically for me after reviewing my background and connections to Horizon Capital. Terrence met me at the executive elevator. "Ready for this?" he asked, his usual easygoing manner replaced with business-like efficiency for the benefit of watching eyes. "I've been ready for this since the day Martin hired me," I replied. On the 58th floor, my newly assembled team waited in conference room A, 15 specialists I'd personally selected, including 3 former Apex employees who'd reached out after my firing. They rose as I entered, and for a moment, the reality of my new position hit me with surprising force. These people respected me. No one was plotting to steal my work or minimize my contributions. "The Apex delegation arrives in 15 minutes, I announced. "Let's review our strategy one final time." We were mid-discussion when my assistant's voice interrupted through the intercom. "Director Sullivan, the Apex representatives are in the lobby." I took my position facing the windows, my back deliberately to the door. A small power play, but one that felt earned after everything that had happened. The conference room doors swept open, and Martin's distinctive voice filled the space, dripping with his trademark artificial warmth. "Truly appreciate your flexibility in scheduling this meeting. As I was telling your assistant, we've identified some exciting enhancement opportunities for the integration specs." He stopped mid-sentence as I turned around. The color drained from his face so quickly I wondered if he might faint. "Olivia," the name came out strangled, barely audible. Behind him, Diane from HR clutched her portfolio to her chest, like armor. 2 other Apex executives I recognized stood frozen, their expressions cycling rapidly through confusion, shock, and dawning horror. "Martin," I acknowledged with a professional nod. "Please, have a seat. We have a lot discussed regarding the Technova implementation." What is this?" Martin gestured vaguely around the room. "What do you do here?" Terrence stepped forward smoothly. "Ms. Sullivan joined GlobalLogix as our Director of Strategic Partnerships 3 weeks ago. Given her intimate knowledge of the Technova integration specifications, she was the natural choice to oversee implementation." This is completely inappropriate," Martin sputtered, color rushing back to his face. "There are confidentiality concerns, potential legal issues. Ms. Sullivan was terminated for cause." "I assure you," I interrupted, "my legal team has thoroughly reviewed my employment agreement. There are no conflicts here. My investment in GlobalLogix predates any connection to the Technova contract." "Investment?" The word seemed to hit Martin physically. He staggered slightly before catching himself. "Horizon Capital holds 8% of GlobalLogix shares," Terrence explained, sliding a document across the table. "Ms. Sullivan is a founding partner in Horizon Capital. This information is publicly available." One of the Apex executives frantically tapped at his tablet, presumably verifying this information. His sharp intake of breath confirmed what he found. "But the contract was with Technova," Martin insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "GL Nova Tech, actually," I corrected, "a wholly owned subsidiary of GlobalLogix. It's detailed on page 42 of the contract you signed." I allowed myself a small smile. The details matter, wouldn't you agree? Martin sank into the chair opposite me, his expression cycling through shock, anger, and finally calculation. Always the stardust. He was already plotting his recovery. "Well," he managed, attempting a tone of professional cordiality that fell comically short. "This is certainly unexpected, but perhaps advantageous. Having Olivia's expertise on both sides could streamline implementation considerably." "About that implementation," I said, opening a folder. "We've reviewed the capabilities of the current Apex team assigned to the project and identified several concerns." What followed was the most professionally devastating 2 hours of Martin's career. My team systematically dismantled Apex's proposed timeline, highlighted critical gaps in their technical capabilities, and questioned their resource allocation, all delivered with impeccable politeness that left no opening for accusations of personal vendetta. "These concerns seem exaggerated," Martin finally protested, sweat beading visibly along his hairline. "Apex has implemented similar integrations for other clients." "Similar, but not identical," I replied. "The proprietary algorithm that secured this deal requires specific expertise. Expertise that, until recently, resided solely with me and my original team. a team you've since reassigned to unrelated departments. I slid copies of our proposed modifications across the table. Martin's face darkened as he read. "This is outrageous," he hissed. "You're essentially taking control of the entire implementation process." "We're ensuring delivery of what was promised," I corrected. The terms also remove the bonus structure Apex planned to exploit and add compliance requirements that anyone assigned to the project must have a clean HR record, which disqualifies you and your executive team from direct involvement. Before Martin could respond, the doors opened again. Richard Harmon of Technova entered, followed by the GlobalLogix CEO. "Sorry we're late," Richard said, then paused when he saw me. Unlike Martin's shock, his expression shifted to understanding, then approval. "Miss Sullivan, I see you've landed on your feet." Martin stood, hand extended toward Richard. "Richard, there seems to be a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Richard replied, ignoring the offered hand. "I've been thoroughly briefed." He took a seat beside me. "Please continue." In that moment, the shift in power was palpable, visible in Martin's faltering posture, in the way the Apex executives exchanged panicked glances, in Richard's pointed decision to sit on my side of the table. "As I was saying," I continued, "implementation will be led by my team, with support from Apex personnel we specifically approve. Starting with Katie Chen," Terrence added, "who I believe was part of Miss Sullivan's Origins team." Martin's knuckles whitened around his pen. "This is corporate blackmail." "This is business," I corrected, my voice level. "You wanted this deal badly enough to sacrifice the person who made it happen. Now you'll have to live with the consequences." As the meeting concluded, Richard lingered behind after the Apex delegation departed. "You engineered this entire situation, didn't you?" he asked, voice tinged with admiration. I met his gaze steadily. "I prepared for possibilities," he laughed, shaking his head. Martin had no idea what he was giving up. "No," I agreed, watching through the glass walls as Martin and his team waited for the elevator, holders slumped in defeat. "But he's beginning to understand." The news spread through both companies like wildfire. At GlobalLogix, executives nodded approvingly when I passed in hallways. At Apex, according to my sources, panic had set in. Katie arrived for her first day at GlobalLogix with wide eyes and nervous energy. I'd insisted she be appointed as lead technical liaison, a position that gave her authority over the entire Apex implementation team. "I still can't believe this," she said as we toured her new corner office. "Last week I was writing code nobody appreciated. Now I'm overseeing a $60 million integration." "You always had the talent," I replied. "What you lacked was someone who recognized it." My assistant appeared at the door. "Director Sullivan, Martin Chen is demanding an urgent meeting. He claims to have information about contractual irregularities." I exchanged glances with Katie. "When?" "He's downstairs now. Security is holding him in the lobby. Let him wait 20 minutes, then send him up." Katie raised an eyebrow. "Power move?" "Just practical business strategy," I replied with a small smile. Never appear too eager when someone's desperate to see you. When Martin finally entered my office, his expensive suit couldn't hide the toll of the past week. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his typically perfect hair showed signs of neglect. "Olivia," he began without preamble, "this vendetta has gone far enough." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "This isn't a vendetta, Martin. It's business. Something you taught me a great deal about." He remained standing. "Your investment in GlobalLogix violated the non-compete clause in your contract. Our legal team is preparing." "Your legal team has already reviewed the timeline and disclosure documents," I interrupted calmly. "My investment pre-prated Technova's acquisition by GlobalLogix, and I properly disclosed all outside business activities as required by my contract." I opened a drawer and removed a folder, including these 3 notification emails sent directly to you, which you acknowledged receiving. His face flushed. "Those could be fabricated. The digital signatures and server timestamps prove otherwise," I replied. "But that's not why you're really here, is it?" Martin sank into the chair, his bluster deflating. "What do you want? Money? Your old job back? Public apology?" I studied him for a moment. The intimidating figure who'd once made me second-guess my own accomplishments now looked small, desperate. I want what I've always wanted: recognition for work done and fair treatment of talented people. The modified contract achieves that by removing the bonus structure you plan to exploit, establishing Katie as implementation lead, and acknowledging my algorithm as proprietary intellectual property that GlobalLogix has now licensed. The board will never approve these terms, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. I slid a signed document across the desk. They already have. Your CFO and COO signed this morning, after reviewing the potential legal exposure created by your pattern of dismissing employees after they deliver significant value. Apparently, I wasn't the only one. Martin's hand trembled slightly as he took the paper. You've destroyed everything I built. No, Martin. I've shown the consequences of building success on other people's stolen achievements. I stood, signaling the meeting's end. The truth doesn't require loyalty to survive. Your business model did. After he left, Richard joined me by the window overlooking the city. That looked intense, he observed. Martin's realizing that power built on fear and theft is remarkably fragile, I replied. How's the market reacting to the contract modifications? IPEX shares dropped 4% when the news broke. Meanwhile, we're up 2 points, Richard miled. Investors appreciate solid strategy and clear leadership. And the implementation team? Ready for kickoff. Katie's already held her first technical briefing. She's impressive, exactly as you described. Later that afternoon, I received an email from Diane at Apex, sent from her personal account. Whatever your intentions were, you've created a ripple effect here. Martin's leadership is being questioned for the first time in years. The board has called for a comprehensive review of executive decisions. Things are changing. I forwarded it to my lawyer with a single note, for the record. The next day, we gathered for the official project launch. 20 faces looked up at me. GlobalLogix staff intermingled with Apex employees who'd joined the implementation team. Katie stood at the head of the table, technical diagrams displayed on the wall screen behind her. Before we begin, I addressed the room. I want to make something clear. This project isn't about the past or settling scores. It's about creating something exceptional that both companies can be proud of. Everyone here was selected because you excel at what you do. I focused particularly on the Apex employees, seeing in their eyes a mixture of uncertainty and hope. At GlobalLogix, your contributions will be recognized, your ideas will be heard, and your names will appear on the work you create. Katie nodded, adding, no one's success comes at someone else's expense here. As the meeting transitioned to technical discussions, my phone buzzed with a message from Terrence. Martin placed on administrative leave, pending board review. I didn't respond. Revenge had never been my goal, only justice and the freedom to build without fear of having my work stolen. The project ahead would be challenging enough without carrying old grudges. That evening, I received another message, this one from an unknown number, 3 more executives suspended at Apex. Board bringing in external consultants to investigate management practices. Your name keeps coming up, not as the problem, but as the wake-up call. I deleted the message without replying. My focus had shifted entirely to GlobalLogix and our future projects. Katie was thriving in her new role, already identifying efficiencies in the implementation plan. 2 other former Apex employees had reached out about open positions at GlobalLogix, their talents suddenly valuable in a company that rewarded innovation rather than stealing it. From my office window, I could see the Apex building across the skyline, still standing but with foundations now visibly cracked. Not because I'd orchestrated its destruction, but because I'd simply removed myself as one of the pillars holding it up. No loyalty, no deal. It was a lesson Martin should have learned long before I had to teach it. In my inbox, a calendar invite appeared for the quarterly board meeting where I would present our implementation progress. In the notes section, Terrence had written, "Afterward, let's discuss potential acquisitions. There's a struggling software firm with excellent IP that might benefit from new leadership." I smiled as I accepted the invitation. The future was unfolding in ways Martin could never have anticipated when he decided I had become expendable. But I had always seen it clearly, even in those first moments of shock when my termination letter landed in my hands. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. People never see you coming until it's too late. 6 months passed. Autumn painted the city in amber and gold, visible from my expanded office on the 59th floor of GlobalLogic's tower. What had begun as a position created specifically for me had evolved into a department of 30, with operations spanning 3 continents. The Teknova integration, once projected as an 18-month marathon, was completing its final testing phase, 9 months ahead of schedule. My phone buzzed with a message from Eliza. Board meeting in 20. You ready for this? I smiled, gathering my presentation materials. Ready didn't begin to cover it. The GlobalLogic's boardroom hummed with anticipation as I entered. Not just executive leadership today, but major heralders as well, including Terrence and Eliza representing Horizon Capital's now 12% stake in the company. Our investment fund had nearly doubled in value since the Teknova acquisition, attracting attention from venture capitalists and business publications alike. Director Sullivan, the CEO, nodded as I took my place at the podium. The floor is yours. My presentation was concise, data-driven, and devastating in its implications, not for GlobalLogic's, but for the company watching helplessly from the sidelines. The Teknova integration has exceeded all performance metrics, I concluded, highlighting the final slide. Revenue is tracking at 122% of projections, with implementation costs 18% under budget. But perhaps more significantly, we've secured migration commitments from 4 of Apex's largest remaining clients, representing an additional $95 million uncontracted services over the next 3 years. Applause rippled through the room. The CEO leaned forward. And Apex's response? Increasingly desperate, I replied, switching to a news article published that morning. The headline said it all. Apex Solutions announces 3rd round of layoffs amid restructuring efforts. Their stock has dropped 42% since our contract modification, I continued. They've lost 7 key technical staff, 6 of whom now work for us. Their last 2 quarterly reports showed negative growth, and they've had to sublease 3 floors of their headquarters to reduce overhead. Terrence stood, addressing both me and the room. The market is noticing. 3 industry analysts have published reports identifying GlobalLogic's as the emerging leader in enterprise logistics solutions, a space Apex once dominated. And Martin Chen? The CEO asked, voicing the question many were thinking. Officially on extended sabbatical while the board investigation continues, I replied. Unofficially, he's been stripped of decision-making authority and retained only as a figurehead to prevent further market panic. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval for my proposed expansion into Asian markets, a strategy that would position GlobalLogic's capture the remaining segments of Apex's fractured client base. As we filed out, Richard pulled me aside. I heard an interesting rumor this morning. Apparently, Apex is looking for acquisition offers. Already? I raised an eyebrow. I expected they'd hold out at least another quarter. Desperation accelerates timelines. Richard smiled. The board wants to discuss potential interest from GlobalLogic's. I considered this. Their client relationships still have value, and some of their legacy systems would integrate well with their infrastructure. At the right price, it could make sense. My thoughts exactly. Richard checked his watch. Care to join me for lunch? The executive team is meeting to discuss preliminary valuation models. As we walked through the atrium, I spotted Katie leading a team briefing. In 6 months, she'd grown from technical liaison to department director, overseeing all implementation projects with confidence and vision. 3 other former Apex employees had similarly flourished, their talents finally recognized and rewarded. One moment, I told Richard, veering toward Katie's group. She looked up, smiling. Perfect timing. We were just discussing the Chen protocol. I raised an eyebrow. The what? That's what the team named the algorithm you developed at Apex. The one that forms the backbone of the Teknova integration. We've been refining it for the new client migrations. The Chen protocol, I repeated, tasting the irony of the name. Seemed fitting, Katie said with a knowing look. Taking something that was meant to control and undermine you, and turning it into the foundation of something better. Later that afternoon, I stood at my office window watching distant rain clouds gather over the city. My phone chimed with an email notification. A message from Diane at Apex, who had become an occasional source of information. Thought you'd want to see this before it goes public, she wrote. Attached was an internal memo Apex's board decision to explore strategic partnership opportunities corporate speak for putting the company up for sale. I forwarded it to our legal team with a brief note, potential opportunity. Let's discuss valuation parameters. As I set down my phone, my gaze fell on a framed article on my office wall. My first cover photo in Business Innovator magazine. The Future of Enterprise Integration, the headline read, with a subheading that still made me smile, How Olivia Sullivan is Redefining Corporate Partnership Models. The interview had carefully avoided mentioning specifics about my departure from Apex, focusing instead on the revolutionary approach GlobalLogix is taking to client acquisitions and technical integration. I hadn't needed to say a word about Martin or my firing. The market had told that story through cold, hard numbers and Apex's plummeting relevance. My assistant knocked gently. Miss Sullivan, your car is waiting. The TechStart conference keynote begins in an hour. I gathered my presentation notes, a speech about building resilient business partnerships that I'd been invited to deliver to 500 industry leaders. In the audience would be CEOs, venture capitalists, and emerging talents eager to learn from what business publications had termed the GlobalLogix revolution. No one from Apex would attend. They couldn't afford the registration fee. As my car navigated through downtown traffic, I received a final message for the day from Richard. Rome has greenlit preliminary acquisition discussions for Apex. Valuation team suggests offering 30% of their peak market value. Your thought? I considered the symmetry of it all. The company that had discarded me would now be absorbed by the company that had recognized my value. The executives who had applauded my dismissal would soon report to the leadership team I had helped build. Fair but firm, I replied. They still have assets worth acquiring, but we dictate the terms. Setting my phone aside, I watched the city pass by my window. 6 months ago, I had stood in Apex's lobby, a cardboard box in my arms, security escorting me to the door. Today, I was about to address an industry as a visionary leader. I hadn't needed to return to their office in triumph or deliver scathing criticism to the executives who had betrayed me. I hadn't needed to publicly expose Martin's patterns of exploitation or the toxic culture he'd created. I'd simply built something better, right before their eyes, using the very foundations they thought they'd taken from me. The most devastating revenge isn't destroying what your enemies value, it's succeeding so dramatically that they become irrelevant to your story. As the car pulled up to the conference center, I saw my name on the marquee alongside global business leaders and tech innovators. Inside, hundreds would listen to my insights on building ethical, sustainable business partnerships. No one would mention Apex. No one would need to. The empire I built in silence spoke louder than any revenge speech ever could.